Stalin defeated Hitler, ruled half of Europe, but he couldn't save his own family from ruin. Did you know that not a single one of his children lived an ordinary, peaceful life after World War II? One was driven into exile, another collapsed into alcoholism and disgrace, and one even abandoned the Soviet Union entirely by defecting to the West. The man who ruled the Soviet Union with an iron fist could control nations, armies, and even the course of history, but he could not save his own family from suspicion, tragedy, and collapse. Joseph Stalin's name still sends shivers through history. He was the man who defeated Hitler, who carved the Soviet Union into a global superpower, and who orchestrated purges and terror that claimed millions of lives. By the end of the Second World War, Stalin stood as one of the most powerful figures on the planet. But while his empire expanded, his family lived under his shadow. They were supposed to be symbols of strength, continuity, and the new Soviet elite. Instead, they became victims of his paranoia, his control, and his impossible legacy. The end of the war in 1945 should have been a moment of triumph for the Stalin family. The Red Army had marched into Berlin, the Soviet Union had survived its darkest hour, and Stalin was hailed as a hero across the world. Yet behind the walls of the Kremlin, the lives of his children and relatives were marked not by triumph, but by tension. Being related to Joseph Stalin was not a blessing. It was a curse. His children lived under constant scrutiny, their friendships and marriages monitored, their personal choices dictated by the leader himself. Stalin was not a doting father. He was a man obsessed with loyalty, discipline, and control. To him, family ties were secondary to political devotion. His eldest son, Yakov, was already gone. Yakov had been captured by the Germans in 1941, early in the war, and Stalin had refused a proposed exchange that might have saved his life. The Germans had offered to trade Yakov for a captured field marshal, but Stalin coldly rejected it, saying, "I do not trade soldiers for marshals." In 1943, Yakov died in a German prisoner of war camp, either shot by guards or electrocuted while throwing himself against an electrified fence. After the war, his absence was a silent wound. His widow and daughter carried the burden of his memory, but without any of the privileges one might expect. In Stalin's household, even grief was overshadowed by political calculation. Yakov's name faded into the background, rarely mentioned, as if even the memory of his capture and death was a stain on the family's image. That left Stalin with two surviving children. His second son, Vasily, lived a life that could almost be described as tragicomic. During the war, he climbed rapidly through the ranks of the Soviet Air Force, becoming a general while still in his 20s. It looked impressive on paper, but it was no secret that his promotions came from his last name, not his abilities. Vasily was reckless, arrogant, and addicted to alcohol. He crashed planes, spent lavishly, and surrounded himself with hangers-on who used him for his access to power. Stalin scolded him constantly for his drunkenness and incompetence, but Vasily never changed. After his father's death in 1953, his fragile world collapsed. The new Soviet leadership saw him as an embarrassment, a loose cannon who could undermine their control. They arrested him, accused him of spreading anti-Soviet propaganda, and threw him into prison. Even when he was released, his life never returned to normal. He was kept under surveillance, isolated from power, and consumed by his own vices. In 1962, at just 40 years old, Vasily Stalin drank himself to death. His funeral was quiet, almost secretive, as if the state wanted to erase the existence of Stalin's son. If Vasily embodied self-destruction, Stalin's daughter, Svetlana, embodied rebellion. She was born in 1926, the apple of Stalin's eye, the only daughter of the dictator. During her childhood, she was indulged in ways her brothers never were. She lived in luxury, educated by the best tutors, treated like a princess of the Soviet Empire. But even Stalin's affection was suffocating. He meddled in her relationships, broke up her romances, and even drove one of her lovers to suicide. Svetlana grew up knowing that her choices were never truly her own. When Stalin died in 1953, Svetlana was free in a way she had never been before. She became an intellectual, mixing with Soviet writers, artists, and thinkers. For a time, she seemed like she might carve out a respected place in Soviet society. But inside, she was restless, deeply scarred by her childhood. In 1967, while visiting India to scatter the ashes of her partner, she did something extraordinary. She walked into the American embassy in New Delhi and asked for asylum. The news stunned the world. Stalin's own daughter, the child of the man who had built the Soviet Union into a superpower, was defecting to the West. Her defection was more than a political embarrassment. It was a psychological blow. For decades, Soviet propaganda had painted Stalin's family as symbols of loyalty and strength. Now, his daughter was declaring to the world that she wanted no part of it. In the United States, she became a celebrity of sorts, writing memoirs that exposed the dark, paranoid world of her father's household. She described the loneliness, the fear, the suffocating control. She revealed the side of Stalin that only his children had seen. Yet freedom did not bring her peace. Svetlana struggled with identity, with belonging, with relationships. She moved between America, Britain, and even returned to the Soviet Union for a brief time in the 1980s, only to leave again. In her later years, she lived quietly in Wisconsin, far removed from the Kremlin palaces of her youth. She died in 2011, an old woman whose life had been shaped, twisted, and broken by her father's shadow. As for Stalin's wife, Nadezhda Alliluyeva, she had been gone long before the war ended. In 1932, she died under mysterious circumstances, officially ruled a suicide, though whispers of foul play have lingered ever since. Her death left a hole in the family, especially for young Svetlana, who never forgave her father. Stalin's paranoia and cruelty only deepened after Nadezhda's death, and some historians believe her absence made the household even colder and harsher for the children who remained. The extended Stalin family fared no better. His in-laws, cousins and relatives were often targets of suspicion during his rule. Some were arrested, imprisoned or executed during the purges of the 1930s. Others survived, but only by living quietly in the shadows, never daring to seek attention or prominence. To be related to Stalin was to live under a permanent curse, one that did not lift with his death. The turning point for the family came in March of 1953, when Joseph Stalin himself died. The man who had ruled their lives as a dictator and as a father was suddenly gone. For a moment, it seemed as though his children might finally be free. But the reality was crueler. Without Stalin's protection, they were not seen as heirs to a dynasty. They were seen as liabilities. The new Soviet leadership under Malenkov and later Khrushchev had no desire to elevate Stalin's family. On the contrary, they wanted to erase them, to ensure that no cult of Stalin could revive. Vasily was imprisoned, Svetlana was monitored, Yakov's memory was buried, and the rest of the family was pushed into obscurity. The most symbolic rupture came with Svetlana's defection. By leaving the Soviet Union and embracing the West, she shattered the myth of Stalin's family. She revealed to the world that being related to Stalin was not a privilege, but a burden. Her act was more than personal, it was historical. It marked the collapse of the image of Stalin's family as loyal pillars of the Soviet system. So what, in the end, became of Stalin's family after World War II? His eldest son Yakov was already dead, a casualty of war and of his father's coldness. His younger son Vasily spiraled into alcoholism, imprisonment and an early grave. His daughter Svetlana defected, lived a life of exile and died far from her homeland. His wife had killed herself decades earlier, unable to endure the life she had chosen. His relatives lived in fear or faded into obscurity. Not a single member of his family found happiness, stability, or peace. And perhaps that is the final irony of Joseph Stalin's life. He built a system of control so absolute that even his own blood could not escape it. His paranoia and cruelty did not just scar a nation, they destroyed his family from within. Stalin may have ruled an empire, but he left behind only broken lives and bitter memories in the people closest to him. So what do you think? Was Stalin's family doomed from the very beginning, or could they have lived normal lives if not for his suffocating shadow? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this deep dive into history, don't forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and ring the notification bell so you never miss our explorations into the forgotten corners of the past.